What if I told you there's a place where you can literally walk through someone's living room to cross an international border? Or there's a country completely surrounded by another country, which is itself surrounded by yet another country. Today, we're diving into 16 of the world's strangest borders that will completely change how you think about geography. From borders that run through bedrooms to nations that exist inside other nations. These aren't just lines on a map. They're the result of centuries of complex history, political negotiations, and sometimes just pure accident. The Belgium-Netherlands border runs through a restaurant. Let's start with something that sounds impossible, but is absolutely real. In the town of Barley, the border between Belgium and the Netherlands doesn't just run through the town, it zigzags through buildings, restaurants, and even bedrooms. At Café de Grandspel, customers can literally sit in two countries while having dinner. The border is marked by white crosses on the ground, and historically this bizarre situation dates back to medieval land agreements between local lords in the 12th century. The most famous case is a restaurant where the kitchen is in Belgium, but the dining room is in the Netherlands. During COVID-19 lockdowns in 2020, shoppers could buy socks on the Dutch side of the aisle, but couldn't step 2 meters into the Belgian side for underwear. The town has dealt with this peculiarity for centuries, and residents often joke about sleeping in one country and waking up in another, because some houses literally span both nations. Point Roberts, the American town you can only reach through Canada. Point Roberts, Washington, is one of geography's strangest accidents. This small peninsula is technically part of the United States, but you can only reach it by driving through Canada. How did this happen? When the U.S.-Canada border was established along the 49th parallel in 1846, negotiations didn't account for this small piece of land that dips below the line. About 1,300 residents crossed the border twice just to reach the rest of Washington state. During COVID closures, access to groceries and health care became so difficult, the state funded emergency measures. Local kids attend U.S. schools in Blaine, riding a school bus through Canada and back to the U.S. each day. Lesotho, the country completely surrounded by another country. Lesotho holds the unique distinction of being completely surrounded by South Africa, making it one of only 3 enclaved countries in the world. But Lesotho's story is particularly fascinating because it was never conquered by its giant neighbor. In the 1860s, King Moshoeshoe I skillfully negotiated with British colonial authorities to maintain his kingdom's independence, while surrounding territories fell under South African control. Independence came in 1966. The mountainous terrain of Lesotho, known as the Kingdom in the Sky, provided a natural defense against the Zulu and later the Boer expansion. Today, this creates some interesting situations. South African police sometimes have to coordinate with Lesotho authorities when criminals flee across the border, and the country's economy is intimately tied to South Africa despite being a separate nation. Lesotho officials often work in South African mines and cities, creating a daily flow of people across this unusual border. The Korean DMZ, the most militarized border on Earth. The Korean Demilitarized Zone isn't just strange, it's paradoxical. Despite its name suggesting no military presence, it's actually the most heavily fortified border in the world. Created in 1953 after the Korean War armistice, this 2.5-mile-wide strip of land stretches 160 miles across the Korean peninsula. What makes it truly bizarre is that it has accidentally become a wildlife sanctuary. The lack of human activity for over 70 years has allowed rare species like the Asiatic black bear and red-crowned crane to thrive. There are an estimated up to 2 million landmines in the area, making it deadly for humans but inadvertently safe for wildlife. The Joint Security Area at Panmunjom is where North and South Korean soldiers literally stand face to face, separated by just a few feet in a concrete line that represents one of the world's most tense political divisions. Capiglione d'Italia is an Italian town completely surrounded by Switzerland, creating a fascinating economic and cultural anomaly. This enclave exists due to medieval politics. In 777 AD, A Milanese lord donated the territory to a monastery, and through various historical changes, it remained Italian while surrounding areas became Swiss. This enclave exists due to medieval politics. In 777 A.D., a Milanese lord donated the territory to a monastery, and through various historical changes, it remained Italian while surrounding areas became Swiss. The town operates on Swiss time, but uses Italian postal services, and until Campagnone re-entered the EU customs territory on January 1, 2020, even used Swiss francs as currency. Residents can work in Switzerland with a G permit as Italian citizens. The town became famous for its casino, which was technically Italian but served primarily Swiss customers who couldn't gamble in their own country due to stricter laws. This created a unique economic situation where an Italian town prospered by providing services that neighboring Switzerland prohibited. In the Bering Strait between Alaska and Siberia sit two small islands that represent one of the world's strangest temporal borders. Big Diomede belongs to Russia, while Little Diomede belongs to the United States. They're separated by just 2.4 miles of water, but also by the international date line, earning them the nickname Yesterday Isle and Tomorrow Isle. During the Cold War, this became one of the most isolated borders in the world. Families were separated when the border was closed, and some relatives didn't see each other for decades. The indigenous Inupiat people had traditionally moved freely between the islands, but suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of the Iron Curtain. Today, the time difference creates surreal situations where residents can literally see tomorrow or yesterday from their windows, depending on which island they're on. Until 2015, the India-Bangladesh border featured one of the world's most complex territorial arrangements, enclaves within enclaves within enclaves. The most famous was Dahala Kegrabari, a piece of India inside Bangladesh, which was itself inside India, which was inside Bangladesh. This created a situation where some residents were essentially stateless, unable to access basic services from either countries. These enclaves, called chitmahals, originated from the 18th century agreements between local rulers who used territories as stakes in chess games and gambling. The problem persisted for nearly 70 years after partition in 1947. In 2015, India and Bangladesh finally exchanged enclaves in the largest peaceful exchange of territory since partition, allowing thousands of people to choose their citizenship and access government services for the first time in decades. Vatican City isn't just small, it's so tiny that its border is essentially a wall around St. Peter's Basilica and the Sistine Chapel. At just 0.19 square miles, it's smaller than most city parks, yet it maintains full sovereignty and even issues its own passports in euros. The border's creation in 1929 through the Lateran Treaty resolved the Roman question that had persisted since 1870 when the Papal States were incorporated into Italy. The Vatican maintains its own postal system, railway station, the shortest national railway in the world, and even has its own top-level internet domain. Citizens don't pay taxes to Italy despite being surrounded by Rome, and the Pope is simultaneously a religious leader and head of state. The Swiss Guard, in their colorful Renaissance uniforms, protect what might be history's most unusual border crossing. The northwest angle, America's northernmost point, is south of Canada. Due to a mapping error in the 1783 Treaty of Paris, a small piece of Minnesota, called the northwest angle, extends north to the 49th parallel, making it the northernmost point in the continental United States. To reach this area by land, Americans must drive through Canada, making it similar to Point Roberts but in reverse. The error occurred because negotiators believed the Mississippi River extended much further north than it actually does. They defined the border as from the northernmost point of Lake of the Woods, but when surveyors finally mapped the area properly, they discovered this created a 319 square mile bulge into Canada. The area is home to about 60 permanent residents who have developed a unique relationship with their geographic isolation, often relying more on Canadian services than American ones due to practical necessity. Bir Tawil, the land nobody wants. In the desert between Egypt and Sudan lies Bir Tawil, a 795 square mile patch of land that neither country claims. This reverse territorial dispute exists because of conflicting colonial borders drawn by the British in 1899 and 1902. Egypt claims the 1899 border, which gives it the larger and more valuable Halayib Triangle, but not Bir Tawil. Sudan claims the 1902 border, which gives it the Halayib Triangle, but not the Bir Tawil. Since the Halayib Triangle is much more valuable, it has a port on the Red Sea and more resources. Neither country wants to claim Bir Tawil because doing so would legally weaken their claim to the bigger prize. This has created perhaps the world's only unclaimed territory, leading to various individuals attempting to claim it and to declare themselves king or president of this desert wasteland. However, none of these claims have any legal recognition. The Gambia, a country shaped by a river. The Gambia has one of the world's strangest shapes. It's essentially just the Gambia River with a thin strip of land on either side, creating a 180-mile-long country that's never more than 30 miles wide. The bizarre geography exists because British colonizers simply claimed territorial rights along the river for trade purposes, while French colonizers controlled the surrounding area that became Senegal. The result is a country almost entirely surrounded by another country, except for a small Atlantic coastline. Senegalese people often have to cross through Gambian territory to travel within their own country, and the two nations have had to develop special transit agreements. The Gambia's economy has historically depended on river trade, and its unusual shape means that almost every point in the country is close to the river that defines its existence. The Haskell Free Library and Opera House in Derby Line, Vermont, and Stansted, Quebec, is intentionally built on the U.S.-Canada border. Constructed in 1904, the building straddles the international boundary, with the entrance in the United States and most of the books in Canada. A black line on the floor marks the international border, and until recently, visitors could freely walk between countries simply by moving from one side of the building to the other. The library was built by Martha Stewart Haskell as a symbol of friendship between the two nations, and it has served both American and Canadian communities for over a century. However, increased security measures post 9/11 have complicated this arrangement, and in 2025, the U.S. further restricted Canadian access, requiring proper border processing, even within the library building. Nagorno-Karabakh, the disputed territory that declared independence. Nagorno-Karabakh represents one of the world's most complex border situations. A region that declared independence from Azerbaijan in 1991 is populated mostly by ethnic Armenians, but is recognized by almost no other countries. The region has been the center of violent conflicts and represents what's called a frozen conflict. The area's borders were disputed, not just internationally but practically. Different ethnic groups controlled different territories, and the actual boundaries changed based on military control rather than legal agreements. After Azerbaijan's September 23 offensive, the self-proclaimed Republic of Look It Up Later announced it would dissolve by the end of 2023. Most ethnic Armenians fled to Armenia. This creates a bizarre situation where people live in a place that considers itself a country, but which most of the world considers part of another country. San Marino claims to be the world's oldest surviving republic, traditionally dated to 301 AD, and its border follows the natural boundaries of Mount Titano in Italy. According to legend, a Christian stonemason named Marinus fled persecution and established a community on the mountain that gradually gained independence. What makes San Marino's border particularly strange is how it has survived for over 1,700 years despite being completely surrounded by much larger powers. The tiny nation has no natural resources and no strategic value, yet it has maintained independence through the fall of the Roman Empire, medieval wars, the unification of Italy, and both world wars. Its survival is largely attributed to its skilled diplomacy and the fact that it posed no threat to anyone. Today, tourism and postage stamps are major parts of its economy, and it maintains full sovereignty despite having a smaller population than many neighborhoods. Gibraltar, the rock that controls a sea. Our final strange border is Gibraltar, a 2.6 square mile British territory on the southern tip of Spain that controls access to the Mediterranean Sea. Captured by Britain in 1704 during the War of Spanish Succession, Gibraltar's strategic position has made it one of the world's most contested small territories. The border between Gibraltar and Spain is just 1,200 meters long, but it represents centuries of diplomatic tension. Spain has never stopped claiming Gibraltar, leading to periodic border closures and disputes. The rock's residents are British citizens but live in a Mediterranean climate, have British red boxes and phone booths, drive on British-style roads, but with right-hand traffic like Spain, but use UK-type G electrical plugs, and can walk to Spain in minutes, but need a passport to do so. In June 2025, the UK, Spain, and EU announced a deal framework to remove land border checks and implement Schengen-style controls at Gibraltar's port and airport, which is still pending legal ratification at the time of this reporting. These 16 strange borders remind us that the lines on our maps aren't just arbitrary drawings. They're the result of centuries of human history, conflict, negotiation, and sometimes pure accident, from restaurants that span countries to territories nobody wants to claim. These borders challenge our basic assumptions about how nations work. They show us that geography isn't destiny. It's the product of human decisions, both wise and foolish, that echo through the centuries. What's your favorite strange border? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed learning about these geographical oddities, subscribe for more fascinating facts about our weird and wonderful world.